The Ahsoka season final is just around the corner and fans can't wait to see how the show concludes. Strap yourselves in because these leaks, especially the ones involving Thrawn, sound insane.
Require the aid, dark magic.
However, I can see some fans being upset about some of the others.
My path lies in another.
Let's get into the leaks, break them down and see how they fit in with the larger Mandoverse story, as it's become quite clear that Ahsoka is that show that's really driving the overall story forwards during the New Republic era, and Thrawn's impending return to the main galaxy, which seems to be the focus of Dave Filoni's movie. But before we get into all of that, let's get into these leaks, which I'll also add that I've put in what I've heard about other projects that tie directly into the Ahsoka final leaks to hopefully paint a clearer picture. Now I will say these are leaks, there's no guarantee they're all going to play out exactly as I'm saying them, but I'll do my best to put them into an order that makes sense based on what we've seen so far, and the leaks throughout the entire season of Ahsoka have been extremely accurate, bearing in mind, so I'm confident on these ones for episode 8. Now going into the episode itself, the runtime is said to be 49 minutes, 43 minutes without the intro and all of the credits. This is a similar duration to what we've seen with episode 6, and it could potentially come in slightly longer than episode 6 by a few seconds, making it the third longest episode of the entire season, of course falling behind episode 1 at 57 minutes and just behind episode 5 at 52 minutes. It's been widely spoken that the second half of Ahsoka is the most exciting, definitely the case when you look back at what we've had so far with Thrawn, Anakin, Ezra, and a Reddit account who has been responsible for a number of correct leaks goes on to say that episodes 7 and 8 are thrilling. Now it's worth mentioning this particular Reddit account do miss a lot of big talking points, and the general consensus online is that they haven't seen the final cut of the show but perhaps an earlier version. It's fair to say that some fans weren't blown away by episode 7 as they were with 5 and 6, however it does lead us into the last episode pretty well. The chess pieces are all into play at this point. Ahsoka, Sabine and Ezra have been reunited, and Thrawn in his own opinion has got the upper hand of almost being ready to escape. And there are more surprises to come with Thrawn, which we're going to get onto. He hasn't played all of his cards just yet, and we'll get into all of that in a moment, but first, the leaks go on to mention that we're not going to see any other new planets in this new galaxy other than Peridia. Now I did speak about this in last week's video for episode 7, and it stays true for episode 8. As mentioned last week, we're likely going to explore this new galaxy in more depth in the Skeleton Crew show, which is said to mostly focus in this new galaxy itself. And this is important because it seems Skeleton Crew will be tying in directly to something that happens in this last episode of Ahsoka, and we'll talk about why in a moment. The Reddit leaker mentions that both Zeb and Luke Skywalker will not be appearing in the show, and whilst I believe this is probably true, don't commit to believing it 110%. As mentioned, it doesn't seem like this particular user has seen the final cut of the show, and we already know firsthand how well John and Dave can keep a secret if they want to. Just look back at what they did with Luke Skywalker in Mando Season 2. When on set, it was actually believed that Plo Koon was going to be the character to appear at the end of the season, with only a small amount of people knowing it's actually going to be Luke Skywalker. So now that we've got the locations and characters out of the way, let's get into what's actually going to happen in this final episode, what's going to be revealed and what's going to be left a mystery potentially. It wouldn't quite be a season final without a large battle breaking out somewhere along the way. Initially, I thought this leak did play out in episode 7, and it was likely the battle with Ahsoka, Sabine and Ezra when Ahsoka arrived on the wolf-like creature to save the day. However, it seems that in fact this large battle the leaks refer to is still to come, taking place in a location called the Notian Highlands. Now the Noti being the crab-like species Ezra was chilling with all them years. You can see why I initially believed this to be the battle in episode 7, as it does sound very similar, and it still could be the case. However, the enemy in this version of the leak is vastly different to the bandits and 2 squads of stormtroopers. Now a very recent leak coming out speaks of 2 armies actually being present on Peridia during the final, one of which seems to be the undead stormtroopers called Night Troopers. They're effectively the stormtroopers that were brought back to life thanks to the Great Mothers using their dark magic, which we've already heard Thrawn mention. And the other army is said to be one that Thrawn has been building up himself using a new species called Nogi, which is actually said to have its own capital ship, which we of course haven't seen yet. It's also worth noting that Thrawn was potentially off-world before his on-screen arrival in episode 6, meaning it's very feasible he has assembled his own army on a nearby planet perhaps. Now this is extremely interesting if it's correct, and it could play out a number of ways. The initial reports of undead stormtroopers came out a long time ago, and visually when you look at them it looks true. However, they didn't release that smoke when they were being killed in episode 7, unlike Maruk, who it seems was also resurrected using Night Sister magic. And now it's led to some fans, including myself, I'll be honest, questioning whether they really are undead or if it's just their armour that's damaged and it's been patched up. Now perhaps the stormtroopers we've seen so far are indeed still alive, with the undead ones yet to be resurrected. Or perhaps the stormtroopers we've seen on screen so far are actually the Nogi, with the undead ones still to come. Of course that part is just my speculation there, but it does ask a lot of questions. So in the trailers we saw footage of Thrawn on board the Eye of Sion, a scene that's yet to play out in the show, so it's pretty likely, in my opinion, that he will escape the new galaxy and return to the main one. But it also makes you wonder, well, what would happen with this army of Nogi that is assembled? Would they be left behind? Would the Eye of Sion also be capable of transporting larger ships as well? Now, of course, this is assuming that the leak about a second army is correct, and to be fair, their name does sound very similar to the crab-like species Noti, so there is some kind of potential of there being a mix-up there. The whole leak itself comes from a Reddit user called Diamond Fire, and whilst they have had some correct leaks for the Ahsoka show, some have been a little bit off. For example, they mentioned that C-3PO was going to appear, but it was going to be part of a flashback, which it turns out, although he was in the show and that part was right, it was set during present times. Now the next leak comes from Christopher Mark, who's been very reliable with his Ahsoka leaks so far. He mentions that there's Zabrak troopers wearing white and burgundy uniforms. Now to be fair, this is the only leak that I've seen that mentions this, and not much is said about this part of the episode to be fair, but given Peridia is the home world of the Night Sisters, and the Night Sisters that we knew on Dathomir had a relationship with the Zabraks, and they were known as the Night Brothers, perhaps we could get more information on the Zabrak's true origins, and potentially they actually started off on Peridia as well. There has been a lot of speculation on the caskets being loaded onto the Eye of Sion from the catacombs, and that they're actually dead Night Sisters to be potentially resurrected either now if needed, or once they're back in the main galaxy. Well, perhaps there are Night Brothers in them caskets too. Right, now let's move into speaking about Thrawn directly, and there's a lot to be said here. Firstly, I want to talk about a droid. There's a lot of older leaks that went around, and more recent ones that have spoke about a droid, or perhaps even a cyborg that serves Thrawn. And to this day, we're yet to see one as far as I'm aware. Well, perhaps the character they're referring to with these leaks is actually one we've seen alongside Thrawn the entire time, in Enoch. Now this is speculation here, but there's been way too many reports of a droid serving Thrawn for it to be completely ignored. And seeing as Enoch is in most scenes where Thrawn is present, and we're yet to see his true face behind the mask, he could very well be a droid or a cyborg rather than being another member of his seemingly undead forces. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of the leaks do focus around Thrawn, the Night Sisters, and his goal to return to the main galaxy, but there's a few that have alluded to something far greater, something far more dangerous to the main galaxy than Thrawn and a reformed empire. And to me this makes sense when you also think about what's going on with Balin, the fact that he's sensing something out there, something potentially calling to him, which he described as a power greater to Thrawn's. Now partially heading back to the Reddit leaker for this one, Economics Legal does speak of this mysterious power Balin can sense out on Peridia, or perhaps nearby. However, he does go on to say that there's no resolution to this part of the story this season. That is something they're looking to explore more in season 2. However, I'm not completely sold on that, as there's actually other leaks that mention that the Great Mothers on Peridia that we know already want to get off are actually monitoring Thrawn's currently unrevealed but main mission of preparing for the Grisk. And when you think the Great Mothers are desperate to leave the galaxy themselves and are also moving the contents of the catacombs with them, it makes complete sense. Balin also mentions that perhaps they're fleeing a power greater than their own. So perhaps they've actually allied with Thrawn as they'll stand a far greater chance together, along with a reformed empire. These two groups can massively benefit from each other if a greater threat's on the way. Now in terms of what's going on with Balin, it's said the Grisk would probe an individual's mind and soul, revealing the deepest fears and desires, which they would then twist to their will. This could also explain why all of a sudden, after being Shin's master for a long time, and seemingly a good one and a caring one, he would abandon her and the mission all of a sudden, which to me feels extremely out of character from what we've seen from Balin so far. So in terms of the episode and the overall battle between the heroes and the villains, I'm pretty certain, based on the sheer amount of leaks mentioning this, that the heroes ultimately fail in their mission to stop Thrawn escaping back to the main galaxy. This makes complete sense considering what we've seen in the trailers, the back of Thrawn's head on board the Eye of Sion. And whilst it looks like Thrawn's going to be making his way back, it also seems that some of the heroes will too. Now I'm unsure at the moment on how they could actually manage to get back. Perhaps they go back as prisoners of Thrawn or stowaways on board the Eye. However, you'll notice that I said some of them return and not all of them. I do know that Ezra is one of the heroes to make it back to the main galaxy, and whilst the leaks aren't clear on who else does, Because it's more than one hero that returns, I think the second is likely to be Sabine and maybe Huyang as well, and I think Ahsoka's going to be left behind. She's going to be the one to stay on Peridea. I say this as previously I've heard Ahsoka will be in the Skeleton Crew show. However, I'm not sure how heavily she's going to feature in that show, but apparently she pops up at some stage. And with that show taking place primarily in the new galaxy, it would fit in well with her being the one left behind. And the Skeleton Crew show could be a way to bring her back to the main galaxy in time for a potential season 2 or Dave Filoni's movie. Another interesting point to note here during the final moments of the season is that Lars Mikkelsen, the actor who portrays Thrawn, actually said you'll probably not know totally what this is about until the last scene. So potentially we could be getting a big reveal or a twist towards the end that could possibly reveal the greater power that's been alluded to in these leaks, or hint towards it being more than something just Balin is thinking about, and Thrawn and the Great Mothers are also aware of it too. So with Ahsoka likely being stuck on Peridea come the end of the show, there's also mention of the Force ghost of Anakin Skywalker appearing to her, but simply smiling and waving. This is meant to show Ahsoka that her master is proud of her. Now, although most fans believe the world between worlds sequence we got with Anakin and Ahsoka was the real thing, that indeed it was really Anakin and not just her imagination, Ahsoka might not be so sure herself, and Anakin's appearance here could be a way to confirm to her that it was actually real, whilst also telling her that despite seemingly losing the day, she's actually on the right path. So overall, the leaks for the show do sound great in my opinion, particularly those regarding a greater threat than Thrawn soon coming into play, one that could be calling to Balin and powerful enough to make the Great Mothers flee their homeworld. It'll be great seeing an Anakin Skywalker Force ghost in 2023, and how the threat of Thrawn is going to be treated. Is he going to be the big bad for these shows and movies to come, or is something else on the horizon? I wonder what surprises are still in store for us in the final, as I highly doubt everything has come out in the leaks. Let me know what your thoughts are on the leaks down below in the comments. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you're new, leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. I'll catch you in the next one. May the Force be with you.